is also with us. Sanjay, this is also some kind of attempt by the Russians to show that they are not isolated globally, that there are non-Western powers which are out there to support Russia and its actions. Tell us more about this trip.
Well, this is clearly an attempt by Russia, as you say, to show that they are not isolated, and they have been isolated more or less substantially since this war began, or the special military operation, as they call it. But clearly this is a sign of assertion coming from Russia, and in the face of a lot of pressure and in the face of setbacks that they've suffered on the battlefield on many fronts. Most significantly, just ahead of this visit, we had Putin visiting Crimea, and then the next day Mariupol. Crimea clearly to underline that Russia intends not to let go, and Mariupol, of course, to firm up the fact that the Russians did occupy that after a very bloody battle and that they intend to hold on to it. Consider that Zelensky has said that there can be no end to this war unless Ukraine takes back Crimea and takes back its occupied territories. This does signify a strong confrontation, and Putin's show of strength and confidence appears to have been strengthened and emphasized further in the face of the imminent visit from Xi, is signaling clearly that not only is Russia determined and willing on the battlefield, but that it has diplomatic support from as powerful a nation as China.
Sanjay, talking about the fact that China is also trying to project itself as some kind of diplomatic power and a power in a nation that can broker a peace deal, if possible, between Russia and Ukraine. Even the Chinese have been trying to challenge the world, the power status, or so to say, trying to challenge the hegemony of the United States. The Chinese also see the opportunity here.
Well, China, as we know, came up with a 12-point peace plan on the 24th of February. That included some elements that were not necessarily hostile to Ukraine. China emphasized that they believe in territorial sovereignty, that they believe in the United Nations Charter, that they believe in negotiations through peace and through dialogue. They said that they are opposed to anything like a nuclear option. But on the eve of this visit, the statements we have been hearing from China are not necessarily a repeat of that position. They have been strengthening, on the contrary, the fact that they are in a very close relationship with Russia. They have mentioned strategic cooperation. They have said that bilateral deals are due to be signed. So the emphasis in tone appears to have changed. And not coincidentally, this change has come because of there a growing confrontation between China and the US. And clearly the Chinese and the Russians are seeing common, at least diplomatic front against the Americans. And of course, this is not just confined to diplomatic opposition. We have seen incidents over the Black Sea. We've seen the balloon incident, and this appears to be signaling
there's a geopolitical context to this meeting, and then hence it becomes very, very important. Sanjay, please stay with us on the broadcast. Our managing editor Zakka Jacob is also joining us on the show. Zakka, what to expect? The big meeting.
This is a significant meeting, no doubt about it, because this is the first major visit by the leader of a major country to Russia since this war began. This was on the 24th of February 2022, and the fact that Xi Jinping is going to Moscow is a big deal, because remember, the Chinese are just fresh off that very surprising deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was brokered by Beijing. It was 4 days of secret talks that happened in Beijing, and now the Chinese are hoping that they can use some of that momentum, some of that leverage, if you will, into trying to broker some kind of a peace between Russia and Ukraine. China had a few days ago unveiled a 12-point peace plan, which ticks off all the right boxes, which is respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty, warning against any escalation, certainly not by nuclear weapons. It also talks about how Russia's concerns have to be addressed, but essentially moving, or at least trying to move both sides to some kind of a negotiated settlement, if not a ceasefire to start with, and then eventually to a negotiated settlement. The problem is, both from Moscow and from Kiev, the response to this 12-point peace plan put forth by China was rather lukewarm. And that is because for Russia, and for Vladimir Putin in particular, he needs some kind of an off-ramp solution. Something needs to be given to him so that he can then move towards cessation of hostilities. On the other hand, for Zelensky and for Ukraine, this is almost an existential crisis. I mean, they cannot be seen as conceding any amount of territory to Russia, because that would be de facto then recognizing the fact that Russia used forcible means to acquire what used to be Ukrainian territory prior to 24th of February 2022. So the problem really in the Chinese plan or any move towards peace is essentially this. If the conflict were to be frozen as it stands today, then about a fifth of Ukrainian territory will go to Russia. Is that acceptable to Ukraine? Is that acceptable to the United States, to its European partners? As of today, no. So the game that's being played by both sides, both by Russia and by Ukraine right now, is to try and force a more decisive outcome on the battlefield. From the Ukrainian point of view, that would be to try and push the Russians as far back as possible to the pre-24th February 2022 position. From the Russian side, that would be to try and fortify its existing presence in the Donbass. Remember, Putin's sort of stated objective when he launched this war was to try and get this sort of a direct line access from the Donbass through the Sea of Azov into Crimea. Crimea, of course, was annexed by Russia back in 2014. So these are the live pictures that we're getting. You can see there'll be a lot of pomp and ceremony because remember, both the Chinese and the Russians are heavy on diplomatic pageantry, as it were. So you will see a lot of that from the runway to the talks table at the Kremlin tomorrow. You're going to see a lot of pomp and pageantry associated with this visit. For Vladimir Putin, he needs Xi Jinping to try and establish some kind of legitimacy. Remember, he had been shunned by major capitals around the world, certainly by the United States, by its European partners. People were not willing to give in to Putin's aggression, thereby giving him any form of legitimacy. Xi Jinping on Russian soil in Moscow, and these pictures are being broadcast by global channels around the world. This will send a message that here is the leader of the second biggest economy in the world standing shoulder to shoulder with Putin, giving him some kind of an endorsement, if you will, despite the aggression and despite the Chinese time and time again saying that they do not believe in violation of territorial integrity or sovereignty of any nation state. Also remember, we've had these reports from both the Wall Street Journal and from Reuters that Xi Jinping, right after his visit to Moscow, is likely to speak to Vladimir Zelensky either via telephone or through a virtual call. And there again, we're given to understand that China is really pressing its foot on this 12-point peace plan. Whether or not something material will come out of that, we don't know, because like I said, if the conflict were to be frozen today, Ukraine will have to give up some territory, and that they're not in any mood to right now. Neither are their benefactors in the US and in European countries. But it depends on how much China is able to convince not just the Ukrainian side, but of course, they do say China has a lot of leverage vis-a-vis Russia. But then you never know with Vladimir Putin. He's a man of his own. He has his own mind. He makes calculations basis his own interests. And his calculation going into this war certainly was that this would quickly get wrapped up. The Zelensky regime would be changed. There will be a new regime, more pliable to him and to the Kremlin. That certainly hasn't happened. Ukraine is standing. Zelensky is standing. The Ukrainian people are putting up a brave fight. So Putin needs to see what is the best off-ramp that he can get, if indeed his intention is to end the war as quickly as possible.
Right, and Zakka, like you've been pointing